Hi guys, hopefully most of you have actually watched the Section 2 summary and you're well and truly prepared to watch this reading. The goals and the success criteria for today are pretty self-explanatory. We're going to read Section 2 and explore Callicles' arguments with a little bit more depth. I guess the reading is really important because you're not being provided with just an outline of what arguments are being developed by the said person. Instead, you're also being shown how, using words and using dialogue, those arguments are being developed. So, we need to refer to our prior knowledge that we gained from a summary of this section. In other words, I'm assuming that you've watched the summary video and that when we launch into this reading, you'll have a fair idea of where Callicles is at and what he's trying to do. And I guess because we're reading how he developed the arguments, not just having them outlined in a summary, we'll be able to maybe capture certain insights that we might have, certain nuances that we might have picked up that weren't necessarily covered in the outline that was provided during the summary. So I'd like you to just go and write these two down and score yourself out of 4. Once you've done that, can you just look at this image of Trump trying to persuade anyone again? And can you tell me how this image would relate to future arguments provided by Callicles? The reason why I'm saying that is because you should have just seen the summary, so you'd have a fair idea about what he's going to argue. So instead of this time you're predicting what you think Callicles is going to say, this time you should be able to use this as like a trigger to help you actively recall what it was that was said by Callicles according to the outline we provided in the summary video. All right, cheers, go for it. Okay, so let's start reading through the section. It should be quick because it directly corresponds to a quick summary that we've already provided. So let's start here. So Callicles has gone on and argued, and remember he's just said not just that cattle are the property of a man who is better and superior. So here he's referring to the idea of natural justice or the laws of nature, and he's saying might is right, and to the strongest should go the most. And then we read on to the end of section 2. These are the... excuse me for a minute. Yeah, now we're alive. Hey, how you going? Okay, so right in front of us, what do we have? We have the text. I'm sorry about that. We just had a quick phone call which had to be addressed. So remember, the first thing we started off in our summary was we said that philosophy is fine if you're a young man, but it doesn't give you the skills that you require to participate in social life amongst your peers and amongst your equals. So that's where we're going to start the actual reading off. Let's start here. These are the facts of the matter. You'd appreciate the truth of what I've been saying if only you'd forget about philosophy at last and turn to more important things. I'm going to make the assumption that important to Callicles would probably mean practical application, yeah? The point is, Socrates, it's fine for a person to dabble in philosophy when he's the right age for it, but it ruins him if he devotes too much of his life to it. Even a naturally gifted person who continues to study philosophy far into life is bound to end up without the experience to have gained the accomplishments he ought to have if he's to be a gentleman with some standing in society. So this is where we start seeing that Callicles really thinks that the main aim in life is to be respected and admired amongst your peers and to be distinguished amongst your peers, not to stand out amongst them. Yeah. In actual fact, philosophers don't understand their community's legal system or how to address either political or private meetings or what kind of things people enjoy and desire. In short, they're completely out of touch with human nature. When they do turn to practical activity, so there you go, there's my assertion being confirmed. To him, it's about being practical, as we set up here when he talked about important, okay? When they do turn to practical activity, then, in either a private or political capacity, they make ridiculous fools of themselves, just as I imagine politicians make fools of themselves when they're faced with your lot's discussions and ideas. In other words, Euripides was right when he said a person shines at and expends his energy on and devotes most of his waking hours to the activity at which he happens to excel. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Euripides says you work at what you think you're good at and what you enjoy. Most of us would say that's the case from experience. He shuns and reviles anything he's not good at and sings the praises of his own speciality in a self regarding way because he thinks this will increase his own prestige. It seems to me that the optimum course is to have a foot in both camps. A certain amount of philosophy helps one to become a cultured person, and it's fine to take it that far. There's nothing wrong with studying philosophy in one's teens. So there we go. This is probably where you should take a note. I mean, if I've read everything so far, it's pretty simple. He's saying studying philosophy is fine. It makes you cultured, but only doing it during your teenage years because more practical matters matter. Take some notes. Okay, so next he says, fine to do in your teens. He goes, but it's a ridiculous thing for a person still to be studying philosophy in his later life, Socrates. I feel the same about doing philosophy as I do about stammering and playfulness. I enjoy seeing a child stammer and play games when he's still young enough for this kind of behaviour to be expected from him. It's pleasantly unaffected, I think, and appropriate to the child's age. When I hear a young child coming out with fluent sentences, however, it seems harsh. It grates on my ears and strikes me as degrading somehow. On the other hand, the phenomenon of a grown man stammering or playing childish games seems ridiculous and immature, and you want to give him a good thrashing. Okay, probably good to say that he assumes philosophy is like child play. That's probably a really good note to take. The next thing is, that's how I feel about people who do philosophy as well. I don't mind seeing a young lad take up philosophy. It seems perfectly appropriate. It shows an open mind, I think, whereas neglect of philosophy at this age signifies pettiness and condemns a man to a low estimation of his own worth and potential. On the other hand, when I see an older man who hasn't dropped philosophy but is still practicing it, Socrates, I think it is he who deserves a thrashing. You see, as I said a moment ago, under these circumstances, even a naturally gifted person isn't going to develop into a real man because he's avoiding the heart of his community and the thick of the agora. That's like a meeting place, guys, which are the places where, as Homer tells us, a man earns his distinction. Instead, he spends the rest of his life sunk out of sight, whispering in a corner with 3 or 4 young men, rather than giving open expression to important and significant ideas. I'm quite fond of you, Socrates, and that's why I react to you in the same way as it happens that Euripides had Zethus, whose words I quoted a moment ago, reacted to Amphion. I'm moved to copy Zethus talking to his brother and say, Socrates, you're neglecting matters you shouldn't neglect. Look at the noble temperament with which nature has endowed you. So he's actually saying, hey, Socrates, I think you've actually got a lot of ability. You have the qualities required to participate in public life. Yet, what you're famous for is behavior that's like a teenager. You couldn't deliver a proper speech to the councils which administer justice, or make a plausible and persuasive appeal, or put passion into a proposed design to help someone else. And yet, my Socrates now, please don't get cross. It's because I'm fond of you that I'm going to say this. Isn't this a state of embarrassment for you? Oh, sorry. Isn't this state an embarrassment for you and anyone else who keeps going deeper and deeper into philosophy? The point is that if you, or if any of your sort, are seized and taken away to prison, unjustly accused of some crime, you'd be incapable, as I'm sure you're well aware, of doing anything yourself. With your head spinning and your mouth gaping open, you wouldn't know what to say. And if, when you appeared in court, you were faced with a corrupt and unprincipled prosecutor, you'd end up dead, if it was the death penalty he wanted. Oh, Socrates, what a clever discovery this is. It enables you to take a naturally gifted person and ruin him. I must be talking about philosophy there, okay? It makes a person capable of defending himself or of rescuing himself of, or anyone else from a terrible danger. The best he can hope for is that his enemies will steal all his property and let him live on his own in his community with no status whatsoever, which would make his situation such that anyone could smash him in the face, even if you'll pardon the extravagant expression, and not be punished for it. No, Socrates, please take my advice and stop your cross-examinations. Practice the culture of worldly affairs instead, and take up the kind of occupation which will make your wisdom famous and leave it to others the subtle will make your wisdom famous and leave to others the subtle root of sprouting drivel or rubbish. These are the right kinds of terms for it, which leaves you living in a deserted house. Don't model your behavior on these quibblers, but on people who make a living and earn a great many benefits for themselves, not the least of which is prestige. So this really should confirm everything that's been put in the summary. Okay? Well, think about it. You didn't really need to take that many notes because it's down in the summary. A, philosophy is impractical. It's fine to do when you're young because it helps you develop those qualities that you need to be a cultured person. But really, you should get your head into participating in your community and using rhetoric. Rhetoric's also much more practical. It can defend you if you are uh, basically the victim of some kind of persecution that's corrupt. It can help you participate in assemblies, make decisions, advocate for people you care about. It's got much more practical applications, whereas philosophy is almost like well, if I was to paraphrase Callicles, it's almost like an immature gameplay of a child, and it's not really that useful at all. So, I mean, if you've got that sense, if you can understand everything that I've said, when we go back to our success criteria, we should really be able to rate ourselves quite highly. So, when you were reading this, did you immediately recall a lot of the ideas that came from the summary? If you did, then you know that you would be at 4 because you used your prior knowledge to make a lot of sense about what we read. When you were reading this, did some of the nuances of the argument come up? So instead of just having bold outlines, did you understand anything a little bit extra, a little bit deeper? If you did, then you give yourself a 4. Okay. And when you did the APK, did a lot of the stuff that came that we talked about here while reading this, did a lot of that actually come back to you? If it did, you know that you're on the right track and you're learning quite a fair bit. Okay. Cheers.